quickly check the stream status. As I've said before, actually, sometimes I've noticed lately that when I start recording, sometimes it doesn't actually show that in the recorded version of the show. So the boom that I like to start off with isn't always there. However, it looks like we are started. It's good to see you all. Good to have you along. I actually did prepare a little bit tonight. It's actually been a good weekend. I'm a little bit tired now, but yeah, I got to do a show with Victor last night, which you may have seen. We were trying out a new streaming platform called StreamYard, which is a little bit like Google Hangouts, but with what Victor and I always wanted for 2.5 Voyages, which was an easy way to stream multiple cameras at the same time, and being able to share a screen. So that was really good. In fact, it was so good, I'm partly tempted to use that for this show. I mean, I could use this overlay and I could use that as an interface. I like how you can highlight comments. There's a lot of features there that I like, but to be able to use those, you've got to pay $20 a month, whereas OBS I have complete control and it's free. So I'm kind of thinking about it, but not thinking about it. The other thing is that I cannot use Korg, obviously. If I do that, I wouldn't be able to. It won't work with plugging in my iPad and playing music, which is something that I like to do, which again I can do. And I actually went back and my settings have not been good for that recently. You've noticed every time I've tried to do that, it's always been a little bit funny. So I actually spent some time today and I cleaned that up. So it should be working a lot better. And because there aren't a lot of topics tonight, actually, one, I'm very happy to take your comments, and yes, anything that you guys want to talk about. We should have some extra time tonight, and yeah, we'll play a tune at the end, including I actually made a track for the first time in months today. So it was a Nissan Z33R tune. Had asked me to make a track a while ago, and I finally got around to making it. It was kind of, it was a bit of a quick cut. It was, it wasn't too flashy. It was pretty good though. I was pretty happy with it, at least for the purpose of what we described. So yeah, I was very happy with that. It is a little bit. One thing is that I do have to turn the aircon up or down quite often when I do this, because with the lights on and with the PC going, the room does get pretty hot pretty quickly. Which is one of the topics for tonight, of course, that we've truly had summer now hit Tokyo. Yeah, my pleasure. There's an R33Z tune. So let's see who's in the room and say hello to everybody. Remember, if you want to get my attention, remember at Mark Hiko Simon, and I will be able to see it highlighted in orange when I glance off to the side. I will stop the show for super chats, but of course you don't need to do that. Yes, we can get into the topics that we have. So who have we got in the comments? I see that we've got Sergeant Bilko, good to see you, sir. Mr. Cordy Chap, we've got Steve from Berkeley, glad that you made it back this week, good to have you. We've got, who else we got here? Tokyo 503, I always feel like I'm skipping people or worried about that. James Kelly, Quint Rankin, boom, indeed. Martin Orlando, made it for 2 shows in a row, that's awesome, it's good to have you in the comments. We've got the J-Vlog, salutations. We have, who else? Nissan 33, R33Z tune. And, I see more people just joining the comments down the bottom. We got Tai Nakamura. That's it, we're caught up. That's the people who are here at the moment, of course. And I know Kangen Kodos is indeed Nissan R33Z tune. It's a good car, so believe me, it's easy to remember. ASMR Sounds of Japan. Yo, we've got Victor there himself. So that was actually what I was talking about earlier. I'm really impressed by StreamYard that he introduced to me. It's a really good tool. It's what I wish Hangouts on Air for YouTube actually had all along. And I think actually, yeah, if we were to figure out how to work 2.5 Voyages back into our lives, that's the way that I'd want to do it, because it's just so easy with that thing. Only thing is, it's a big difference going from free to paying $20 a month. I mean, that works out at $240 a year. That's quite a lot. It would be worth it for this show. I mean, I make 50 shows or so of this show per year. It would be worth it. But yeah. In any case, it was. And with the layout, you can do custom layouts, but you got to pay for it. So that's the thing. Indeed, good to have Victor here in the comments, though. ASMR Sounds of Japan. Also good to have Tho Essex. In fact, you know what? From Portugal. Good to see you from Portugal. I know Brazilian Portuguese, but not really Portuguese. So I know from my Brazilian friends that I'm supposed to say como vai and tudo bem and muito legal and so on, but I don't know if that actually comes across properly for Portuguese, but good to have you all the same. And I don't know how to pronounce your name. It looks like THOSXPH, so I would say Thosix. But anyway, no falo português. Victor's pulling some there as well. Obrigado. Yes, good to have some new viewers in the comments. Remember, say hello if you're in there. It's always nice to see where people are from. The new tune that I made, I actually put it up on SoundCloud. This is I made this for Nissan 33Z tune. Gave me a challenge actually, and it was actually kind of fun. He had a specific track that was very centered on like a steel drum sounds, and I was kind of like, okay, so I found a steel drum sample which I had to figure out how to sample and then turn into a keyboard in iOS GarageBand. So that was really fun learning how to do it. I did that a while ago actually. So I set up a keyboard based on a sound sample of someone playing those Caribbean steel drums, and I mixed it with some sort of video game car racing music sort of sounds that I had in my head. I kind of mashed them together a little bit, and but I think it came out pretty cool. And it was, he gave me an image of a track that he was thinking of, which is a crab rave, and it just so happened that my son went to the aquarium the other day, so I had a perfect thumbnail. It was as much me getting back to grips with using my tools. The other thing that I'm really happy with is that I used the keyboard there. I actually did compose it using, I did some of it in Korg, and I moved those samples over, and I did quite a bit of it, including like the main parts of it all on the keyboard actually. So I was pretty stoked about that. So thank you. Listen, I'm sorry, that took me like 2.5 months. If I could share with you all the crap I've been through in the last 2.5 months, all I will say is that I was just going through a time in my life where I needed to shut everything. I love to keep this going, and I definitely do keep this show going. But pretty much every other thing that I would normally like to be doing when I have more time, making music, going to the gym regularly, all the things I kind of do, I had to just shut everything down for a long time. Started with me getting sick, but it of course was just work and drama and whatnot. So I actually felt really good to get it done, not just because I really wanted to get this done, but also it was nice to get a bit of that sanity back. I mean, I do this as much for that's a good point, Ty. Actually, you know what, I can play it. I can give you a little bit of a taste of it. It's like I say, I'm happy with it. It was good enough to upload. I could probably spend more time on it and do a bit of a better job of it. So if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to play it, I would have to go to, in fact, I would just go straight to the link, wouldn't I? Just trying to think what's the best way to do this. So I would go here. I can do this. That's a good idea, Ty. I'm going to play a little bit for you guys. And ladies. Let's plug that in. That means I would want to go to my profile where I tweeted it earlier today. So now let me Now that's not coming through, which means I'd have to switch the input for this to work. Okay, so let's do that. Let me switch over to Korg briefly. Oh, what you can see there. Now if this is working, which I hope it is, let's try this out. There it goes. I don't actually have a monitor in right now. I might just stick that in just for a listen. So this is what I made today. There it goes. Bumping the cable a bit. So that's the improvised keyboard that I made with the steel drums. That was pretty fun learning how to make a keyboard. I'll let it go one more bar. Okay, fade that one out. Oh, that was a bit sudden. Anyway, you can check out the track. I tweeted it earlier. It's on my SoundCloud. And I'll probably come back and play some more tunes a bit later on if we get the time. But for now, I'm going back to the regular show format. Faster, says Sergeant Bilko. I probably could speed it up a little bit. I don't know, that was pretty cool. That's a little bit of a taste, but what was cool about that was I combined samples that I made in a Chaos Oscillator. I took some sampled drums, and I made a keyboard based on a single sample that I was able to actually tune and then use my actual keyboard to play it. So yeah, I was pretty happy with that, and I think it comes out kind of the sequence of chords actually reminds me of a techno track I liked back in the 90s, which I just turned into a really simple loop. But yeah, it's kind of cool. Anyway, so that is the first thing, and that is something creative that I did that makes me feel good. Here is the show that I did last night with ASMR Sounds of Japan, Victor Boju, right there with 5 people actually. There was Mully was there, so at the time that the thumbnail came out, of course, he wasn't there. But I do love the multiple cameras at once. I really much prefer when you could show like Victor and I talking, for example, side by side. It's actually fun. I know that I do kind of fight for the mic a little bit. I do talk a little bit more than I always go in intending to do. But yes, at the same time, what I find really fun about doing those shows with Victor is always just letting Victor be Victor and say Victor things. And, you know, I quite like reacting, and it's kind of fun when I can react and I don't need to say anything to trigger the camera to come on to me and you can see. ASMR, well, I think last night it was really about getting Professor Outlaw to tell his story, and I obviously, you know, I had nothing to compete with that. But, you know, I think one-on-one it's always fun, and it's fun when you get a single guest. So, for example, I do like the format, and I really think you should go further into that. It was a good show. It was basically talking about, well, a very specific case of healthcare in the US. But also talking about the healthcare system in Japan, which is interesting for anyone who comes over here. And yes, I would encourage anyone to go have a look. Actually, it was a really good story. Actually, really thought-provoking. This reminds me, by the way, I don't know why I remember this, but I know I didn't put it into the comments here, so I'm just going to mention it. So I was going through my notifications, you know, in YouTube, which I don't actually pay much attention to, but I noticed that someone left a comment on one of my oldest videos. When I first started making videos, I made them in Japanese, and somebody left a comment asking, hey, how do you learn to speak Japanese like that? So I made a video in English saying how I learned Japanese, and then it occurred to me, well, since I'm making videos in Japanese, I might as well do the reverse and say how I learned Japanese in Japanese as a reference for people who want to learn English. And I got a really good title for that video. Of course, that is my only really viral video that I've ever made, and it still picks up pretty good views actually. It's like 11 years ago now. But yes, I was just talking about the ways that I used immersion to learn Japanese, and someone left a comment on that video saying that apparently there is a YouTuber I hadn't heard of called Matt vs. Japan. Maybe I shouldn't even have named him, but yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, apparently this guy who makes videos about learning Japanese and how to be fluent in Japanese, apparently on a video, I don't know which video it was, I started to Google it and I thought, nah, you know what, I don't need to do this. But left a comment saying, oh yeah, he was like watching your video like live on a video stream or something and commenting, picking apart my accent in Japanese and pointing out the flaws in it. And I felt like going over and, of course, the insecurity in me first wanted to go over and make some sort of smart-ass comment, but then I kind of thought about it. I tweeted about this today. It's actually something I've talked about this myself, and I think I even said this in the video myself, that one thing I did when I was trying to improve my Japanese was I'd find people who are better at Japanese than me, and I would like always be analyzing them. And I would be not only looking for what they did that was better than me, but I would also look for the flaws. I'd try to look at, okay, how do I become better than them? What are they doing wrong that I can improve on? And I would look at people with that air. And, you know, it's one of those things that it's pretty it's uncomfortable enough when you're a non-Japanese, you know, and you're analyzing other non-Japanese, or you're being analyzed by other non-Japanese. You're very self-conscious to begin with when you're speaking a foreign language. So it's kind of a dick thing to look at people from a perspective of, oh, what's he screwing up? Oh, am I better than them or not? Kind of ranking yourself. But of course, it's something that you do. Is that insecurity is what motivates you when you're learning a language. And it's something I did. I mean, I try not to show it, but I was totally doing that all the time. And it sounds like that's exactly what this person was using my video for, for basically looking at my accent and figuring out, well, what could they do that's better than me? And you know what? Actually, my video is out there, it's public. I'm encouraging people to do that kind of thing. And although I look back on it now and I feel like, man, I was such a dick doing that, like, even internally and not showing it, let alone actually broadcasting it on a video. At the same time, it helped me get good at Japanese. So my smartass response, which I put on Twitter today, was, if being a dick helped me get as good as I am at Japanese, by the sounds of it, this person's possibly going to be the best person at Japanese in world history. Because he sounds like quite a dick. But it's genuinely helpful. It's actually a good thing. And you know what? Yeah, I put my video out there of me speaking in Japanese, and people can go and critique it. That's totally okay. So, yeah. And by the way, I don't. Well, this is the thing. I don't know which video it was in. I tried searching for my name for a moment. I couldn't find it, and then I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to stop doing this because this is the point. And the person commented later as well. Yeah, this person does this with other foreign Japanese speakers as well, and does the same thing. And on the one hand, it looks like the old schlong thing, trying to make themselves look better than everybody else. But actually, yeah, they're allowed to do that. It's a good way to learn. I mean, it's kind of a dick thing, but it is actually really helpful, and I actually encourage people to do that myself. So, yes, good luck to you. And bear in mind, from my perspective, I've been here 20 years now. So, like, certainly there was a phase, there was a time when, to me, becoming fluent in Japanese was a goal that I had. And it's like when you're a 2-year-old kid or a 1-year-old kid and you're learning to walk, and that's something you're very focused on until you can do it. And once you can do it, you generally think of all the things that you can do now, that you can do that one thing, and you focus on those new goals. And that's what my life has been like, right? Basically, I haven't really focused hard on my Japanese since I became comfortable enough. I don't need to think about it anymore. But, for people who want to focus on it for the purpose of, becoming an expert teacher, or people who are just still trying to improve themselves, that's actually great. And yeah, no, the J vlog, that's a totally correct point. No one knows any language 100%. If they say they do, they are delusional. But most people are delusional because most people believe that they understand their own language 100%. And of course, that's the biggest falsehood, let alone learning foreign languages. People don't realize, it's one thing that you become really aware of that I love about language learning, is that you become aware of things like, you always assume that you're listening to every single word. You're listening to every single sound, you're processing the meaning of every word, and you're attaching it together in English. And you do those things that you assume that you're doing in English, and you try to do it in a foreign language, and you become aware when you're learning Japanese that no, you're actually skipping out a lot of the sounds, you're skipping out a lot of the processing, you're taking overall context and a whole bunch of other things, and that's why we can process much faster in our native languages than in foreign languages. It's not that we've memorized every word in the English language. In fact, most people actually understand English a lot less than they believe that they do. So that's an excellent point. Well, no, the point is that I'm actually cool with what I mean. Sure, a little part of me doesn't like some young, snot-nosed, dickhead making fun of my video, but at the same time, I actually encourage him to do it. It's actually, he's doing the right thing, and hopefully, he'll look back on that video and the other videos that he's making probably 10 years from now and be embarrassed, just like I was embarrassed when I was in Japan for about 10 years, and I looked back on when I first got off the boat, and how much I did those sorts of things myself. So yeah. Nissan R33 tune, there are so many ways to express something in the same sentence and so many meanings. You read contracts a lot, so yeah, English is tricky. Yeah, English contracts, because of course I do contracts as well, and programming, which I used to do, are kind of cool in a way, because while it's true both with programming and with contracts, there are many ways to skin a cat. You can achieve the same thing with many different types of wording, but you're much more tied to the accountability of making sure it's complete, and it has precision to it, even though you can do it in different ways. That's really why I think for language, actually, and programming is the same as law like that actually as well. You can't skip a step in a program. The program won't work, and this is the difference between programming and a contract. The contract is the same as well, except there's you can't do an automated bug test. The program won't stop at the bug, so you actually have to catch the errors. But well, hell yes, I was a fresh off the boat, indeed. We all were, geez, at some point. Well, maybe we weren't, but I come from a country of a lot of immigrants as well. So yeah, Tonga memory. Yes, I've got this one next. I've been watching the US. Well, no, I haven't really, honestly. I've been kind of loosely following the US Democratic debates, and I'm not really that. Yeah, and Quint Rankin, absolutely. And Olivia D, excellent to see you. Good, thank you for joining. I guess some people here have been watching the Democratic debates. I've kind of been watching it, and honestly, I don't like anybody right now. I mean, obviously, I would pick a horse's ass over the current president, but what I don't like, about the Democrats, in general, is at this time during the primaries, is of course, they always go through this thing where when they're going for the internal Democratic vote, they try to be as, kind of left-wing as possible. And then when it becomes time to go into the real, elections against, for the general public, then they try to move towards the center. And, Obama, Bill Clinton, they were very good at this. They were good at saying during the primaries that they were going to shut down free trade, and they were going to protect American workers, and they were going to give free health care to everybody. And then when it came time that they wanted to get middle state and swing voters and so on, they would suddenly become, oh no, we're actually pro-business and free trade, and we're Democrats, but we're tough on crime. And sometimes, of course, in the case of Bill Clinton, he locked up more minorities. He put more Americans in jail than anyone in history, and partly just out of wanting to demonstrate that he wasn't soft on crime, which was a presumption for being a liberal. He pushed NAFTA as did Obama, and Obama was an isolationist as well. I mean, I remember being alarmed by Obama during the primaries. He seemed like a cool guy. But when him and Hillary Clinton were both saying that they were going to protect American workers and that they were going to, end NAFTA or wind back NAFTA and, restrict free trade, I supported Hillary Clinton because I knew that she was a liar. I knew that she was absolutely lying through her teeth when she was saying that, and that she would go out and she would promote the TPP, which she did under Obama. I was afraid of Obama because I thought he might not be lying. He seemed like an honest guy. It turned out, of course, he was like, every Republican and Democratic president until then. And of course, he did become, as you need to be when you become president. He made made decisions which were clearly, in my mind, in the best interest of America, and for pro free trade, and spent years negotiating this TPP with Japan and New Zealand and Australia, which really I think was a really, really great thing. However, now it's kind of funny. The people voted for Trump, but one of the reasons I think people voted for Trump was when he was being isolationist. People thought that he seemed so crazy he might just actually follow through and do what he was saying. And I think he kind of has in a way, and he's shown how stupid isolationist rhetoric is. Yet here I am watching the Democratic primaries, and nobody's speaking up for free trade. And I know that they're thinking that they have to represent to the unions and to the workers, that they're going to protect them. But basically, all that they're doing is making the same promises that Trump made, and with a track history of lying about when making those same promises. They're not going to win voters from that. And it really disappoints me, given how many Democrats pushed for free trade, under the Obama administration, are not there defending it. It's almost like they're, Biden, and others. It's like they're embarrassed by it. And yeah, I'm an internationalist by nature. I'm a New Zealander living in Japan for 20 years. My whole life is defined about helping international cooperation, and it always frustrates me to see how in U.S. politics, and not just in U.S. politics, everywhere else, people don't make the arguments for free trade, even though they seem to accept it's the right thing, at least for normal stuff. So I'm kind of watching it, but I'm finding the Democratic primaries a bit like the audition week for American Idol. It's mostly just freaks. You just watch it to see who's saying the craziest stuff. Who's taking who down or whatever. There's too many people to remember. That they're not going to be around for very long, so you figure you might as well not get attached to any of them and wait for someone to come through. We'll see what happens. The other thing, I guess, with America, most of it was taking my attention tonight. Pardon me. 2 mass shootings in a day in America, and it seems that the first one was another, Unabomber manifesto-inspired mass murder. The Unabomber manifesto was used both by the Norway mass shooting, mass murderer, and the mass murderer in Christchurch, and it sounds like he's produced something similar. The person who did this in El Paso, and then on the same evening in Ohio, there's been another mass shooting by another white male wearing military, wearing bodyproof armor, face mask, earmuffs, and having a high power, weapon. And I don't know if that's on the same trend as these other things, but at what point do you start to, it's sort of like, how many, 9/11 was a huge attack, but how many Muslim, Islamic terrorist attacks have there been on American soil? Like, what's the number of attacks compared to the number of attacks carried out by people with this sort of ideology? We've transformed airports. There's this kind of presumption and mistrust of Muslims and Arabs and so on, and yet overwhelmingly the greatest number of these very destructive and very harmful ideologically driven mass murders, i.e. they are terrorism. They are designed to instill terror for political means. I mean, with a manifesto that is getting dropped, at what point do we start to say that these alt-right groups are actually the greater threat than Al-Qaeda, for example, or ISIS? These other groups, these are boogeymen which, yes, they exist, and yes, they do, terrible things, but in terms of the security threat to Western countries, you have to start asking, when are we going to start, I don't think if we're being fair and honest, they should be treating people like me the way that they're treating Muslims, basically, right? I mean, it's always the same profile shooter. And the other thing is that this kind of ideology that these people follow, it's traceable again, and it's arguably more harmful than jihadist ideology. So I'm really, well, again, I mean, for all the other things, I won't get into the gun debate thing because it's just stupidity, frankly, on the part of America, that they just refuse to deal with it, where every other country deals with it. But there's all sorts of ways to come at it. But what it isn't is it's clearly not a mental health issue. I mean, maybe there's psychological aspects to what makes people become ideological mass murderers, but the idea that they're simply crazy is a cop-out. These people do what they do with ideology and reasons. These people often have no criminal history. They often are licensed gun holders. They're often well educated, and they subscribe to certain types of ideology and groups online, just like terrorists from other types of terrorist groups. I mean, you have to start treating them the same way. That's my other thought from tonight. I've talked too much about America, but it's bugging me, so I'm sharing. And by the way, again, if you want to get my attention, of course, I see lots of people making comments. Remember to @mark me, otherwise I can't stop and read all the comments. But yes, America continues to be interesting. Last night, now what caused me to look at this? There was something I was on some sort of reading, some sort of thing last night. Now I mentioned there was some sort of anniversary of the WWII Breakout. And I was like, I've never heard of the WWII Breakout. What's that? And it turns out, so everyone knows the movie The Great Escape in World War II about the British and I think American prisoners who were in Germany. 76 of them escaped from the biggest breakout from a prisoner of war camp in Europe in World War II, and they dug tunnels, and they made a great movie. Most of the people who were captured and shot afterwards. But it wasn't actually the biggest POW breakout in World War II. It wasn't the Great Escape in Germany. I had no idea about this. It was the WWII breakout in Western New South Wales by 1,100 Japanese POWs breaking out of an Australian POW camp. I honestly, I didn't even know that there were POW camps. I mean, of course there were POW camps in Australia, but I never even really appreciated that. So I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole last night watching, documentaries. Apparently there's even a mini-series which I found on YouTube. Far too long to watch, but I was kind of skipping through trying to get the story, which was obviously made in Australia, very much focused on the Australians who participated in it. But it was crazy that there were this number of Japanese prisoners. There was this enormous breakout that happened, and and hundreds of Japanese were shot during the breakout, and were and as they were rounded up. There was something which was mentioned during the documentary in the movie. There was a moment in the movie where there was a Japanese prisoner talking to the other Japanese prisoners, who said, "Hey, in New Zealand there was another breakout, and we need to do something like what they did, like to restore our honor." And I was like, a prisoner breakout in New Zealand? I've never heard of that. And then I learned about, and this the most detailed account that I was able to find on written or in video was actually, it was in Japanese, but it's his translation. So the Featherston Incident, again, I never heard of this before. My dad was in the New Zealand Army. He actually established an officer cadet school, and the syllabus for this school, which included teaching New Zealand soldiers about about war crimes and failings of the New Zealand military and history, which we have. When we went into Samoa after World War II, which was a German occupied or German colony, we went in and shot collaborators who people on the islands who just had the misfortune of being colonized by the Germans. The New Zealand Army, when they went in to go and take the islands over after the Germans were pushed out, went and shot people who supported the German administration. We treated conscientious objectors as basically, we put them into what we called ourselves concentration camps. They were punishment detention for conscientious objectors who didn't want to go off to war. And this I was told about by my dad, and this was something, it was a very self-critical view of history. Yet I never knew about the Featherston massacre. And the Featherston massacre, it's a fascinating story which I heard for the first time last night. So at one of the, what do they call them, the boot camps that they used to send troops to before they send them away to war, they converted it into a POW camp, and they had a large number, hundreds of Japanese and Korean and Formosan, Taiwanese prisoners of war who had been gathered up from after Guadalcanal and many of Solomon Islands and those sort of theatres, and they were shipped. The first lot of POWs were sent to New Zealand, not to Australia, and they put them into this camp. The New Zealand didn't really have any experience running a POW camp, and apparently they had sort of disabled and troops who couldn't go to the front line who would stay behind and look after this camp. Also, the Japanese Japanese didn't sign up to the Geneva Conventions, and culturally, they didn't really understand. There was of course a mentality during the war, apparently among Japanese troops, of it being considered shameful to be taken prisoner, and and no familiarity with what it is to be a prisoner of war. So apparently, when they were sent, the Geneva Conventions allow, which Japan wasn't a party to, but they allow countries to put prisoners to work, to keep them occupied. But apparently there was a sit-down protest. Hundreds of Japanese decided that they didn't want to be forced to do work for the New Zealanders, so they sat down. And when the guards tried to push the workers to get back to work, and they was basically sitting down, apparently there was one ranking, not the highest ranking, but there was a ranking sort of lieutenant for the Japanese who maybe could speak English. They tried to get him to make them cooperate, and he was belligerent, so a guard shot him through the shoulder, and when they shot him through the shoulder, hundreds of Japanese got up and basically rushed the guards. They were unarmed, some of them had rocks. However, the reaction of the New Zealand guards was to machine gun 111 of them, killing 48 of them. So yeah, that was probably the worst mass killing in New Zealand. And as I think you get with all history like this, you see a lot of comments on this video and on other videos talking about this massacre, which I'd never heard of before, saying, well, that wasn't a massacre, it was a prison riot, and the Japanese attacked the guards and they didn't have any choice. Well, that's not how the account reads to me. It reads like this was a very badly handled prison protest where the guards obviously panicked, and there was apparently one shell-shocked, one PTSD returned from service person who had a large high-power weapon from a high height who did most of the killing. But they machine gunned 111 unarmed people, and that happened, and that's probably the worst massacre. And that is a massacre. It's a riot that became a massacre. And that became the worst massacre in New Zealand history, and I never heard of it. So through the day I was professing my shock to not knowing this thing about my own history with Japan. Some other people told me as well, there's lots of stuff about World War II. For example, there were riots in Australia between New Zealand and American troops. there were incidents, and this was actually, and this set me down another rabbit hole that I didn't mean to look up, but for example, there were a lot of US troops stationed in Wellington, and apparently the US troops in World War II who were from the South were not accustomed to having non-white people being able to drink in the same bars. In New Zealand, of course, Maoris were very well integrated into society and in the military. And, apparently southern US troops tried to prevent Maoris from coming into the bars where they were drinking, which caused some fights, which caused the US troops to, in Seattle, to stab two Maori soldiers to death. And in Wellington, when US troops attacked a bunch of Maori soldiers, apparently Caucasian and Maori New Zealand soldiers apparently caused like a Manor Street riot. They caused basically a brawl that involved over 1,000 people and went on for a day, attacking the US troops, basically for trying to bring segregation into New Zealand. This was actually another theme that, as a New Zealander, I suppose you feel a bit of pride about, that when the South Africans used to send rugby tours of New Zealand, and the South African media were outraged that Caucasian New Zealanders were supporting Maori rugby players against Caucasian South Africans as race traders. I'm very proud of that. I think that's actually a cool thing about New Zealand. But yeah. Steve from Berkeley, I didn't know this either. So, and these are from my own countries. I mean, I'm from Australia as well, although I'm a Kiwi. But my mum worked in the Army Museum. My dad established the Officer Cadet School in New Zealand. And I didn't know about this. So this is actually kind of shocking to me. A lot of people get very defensive about this, and other than playing down this, they point out, well, of course, the Japanese treated our troops a lot worse, so, this is nothing compared to that, and that's all true, but of course, it doesn't excuse, we play up there how morally superior we were. I certainly grew up reading, Bridge Over the River Kwai and books, endless books about how brutal Japan was, and not just to New Zealand and towards Australia. I lived in Singapore as well, and they did terrible things in Singapore. So we all know about the brutality of Japanese troops, but we always believed somehow that we were always morally superior, and maybe even with this we were. But the idea that we hide the sort of infallibility, it is a hypocrisy, and it's something that I don't think you can truly be morally superior unless you acknowledge the faults that are on your side as well, which this is interesting to me. This is just an eye-opening example of a case where that wasn't true. Steve from Berkeley, oh yeah, so weren't aware of this, but indeed. In any case, let's keep going on. Those were really interesting to me. So this week, I suppose the big story was, of course, that Japan decided to revoke actually that's the reverse. Well, I think I explained this briefly last week, but I'll explain it again this week, which is that there's as usual, of course, Japan and Korea just not getting along. But in addition to the war labor issue, which Japan says was settled by the 1965 treaty, and the Korean government actually agreed that they would pay all the individual claims in South Korea, but the South Korean government's now ignoring that and making Japanese companies having their assets seized by the Korean courts in order to pay individual claims in South Korea, and that's causing one diplomatic issue. But in parallel to that, there's a separate issue which has been happening, which was that Korea is the only country in Asia which Japan actually gives preferential export access, which is that when Japan wants to export sensitive technologies or materials, including materials that could be used for nuclear weapons or military purposes, that South Korea does not have to go through the document, or South Korean companies or purchases from Japan do not have to go through this document paper trail that that, for example, in Taiwan or Thailand or China would have to go through buying the same materials from Japan. So this is part of, instead of that, the government, at a government-to-government level, the Korean government tracks these materials and provides the paperwork for Japan, which Japan provides in reporting to the United States. But under this deal, basically, Korea gets preferential treatment where it can avoid a lot of bureaucracy and red tape with exporting specifically dual-use military-use products. And apparently what had happened was there were 156 cases last year where exports to Korea were lost. They were not able to be traced, and there were suspicions that these might have ended up being sold through South Korea to, for military use, for example, in places like North Korea or Iran or whatnot. And when Japan asked the South Korean government to improve this and to please prevent this happening and to provide documentation that Japan itself needed to with regards to these exports, the South Korean government ignored these requests. And this is all happening at the same time as this diplomatic trouble was happening with South Korea. So the Japanese government did decide this week that they were going to revoke South Korea's special status, that they could get an express treatment to having these exports sent through without the need for special documentation and tracking, which requires a case-by-case approval by the Japanese government, which can add 2 or 3 months to a normal fast-track sort of a process. The South Koreans immediately interpreted this. All they needed to do was provide paperwork to avoid this, and they had ignored requests from the Japanese government for it. But however, and these were required, for Japan to prove that, to other countries that it was actually properly ensuring that these things were not going to, to terrorists and to rogue states. However, South Korea, having failed to meet its obligation to Japan to provide this documentation, Japan giving warnings and multiple requests about this, decided this week that they were going to remove South Korea from the preferential list because they weren't holding up their end and meeting their obligations, unlike the other 27 countries that are on this list for Japan. South Korea immediately said that this was obviously economic retaliation for the diplomatic fallout from the war labor court decisions, and certainly that probably did play into the decision of the Japanese government to pull the trigger, and the Japanese government said itself that they were doing this because they had lost trust in the South Korean government, which clearly is happening. So what we've had all this week is we've had, in different places, we've had the South Korean government screaming murder, screaming that removing them from this preferential list of 27 countries that get fast-track access to sensitive exports is a violation of WTO rules, which the Japanese government is saying, hey, no country is obliged to give any other country preferential treatment. I mean, we're just treating them like a normal country, and we're doing it because they screwed up. They didn't meet their obligations to provide proper documentation for these exports. So the Japanese government's kind of stayed calm, and frankly, I think, if you ask me, I lived in Japan 20 years, but on both the issue about the 65 treaty and how those claims should be handled. And by the way, as I've always said, people should absolutely be compensated. Individuals should be entitled to compensation for conscripted work or slave labor for the Japanese military government. But clearly, under the 65 treaty, that obligations on the South Korean government, Japanese government has actually paid for that. And on this as well, this is a failing of the South Korean government, not the Japanese government. Granted, the Japanese government probably knew what it was doing and did it opportunistically. However, it's of course set Korea off. They've gotten very, very upset, and they have retaliated by revoking Japan's preferential status, although they don't exactly have a reason for doing that. It's just pure retaliation. Now there's boycotts and whatnot. So until this point, I think Japan actually, as seems to happen in a lot of these disputes, Japan and Korea both fighting, everyone looks at them and says, oh, they're like kids fighting with one another, both of you just behave or whatever. But sitting here from Japan, I'm always like, well, Japan's kind of actually right, South Korea's kind of acting hysterical, but what can you do? And Japan was kind of, I think, maintaining that moral high ground until this. Of course, everyone knows this statue, the young girl, this comfort woman, sitting, waiting for a proper resolution of the comfort woman issue. The statue, of course, has been placed out in front of many Japanese embassies and consulates in South Korea as a protest statue. And there was a Nagoya Aichi Prefecture government-sponsored art exhibition for the summer vacations where kids can go and visit. And there were many themes of this art exhibition where artists were invited to come and put up posts. And one area was on the theme of suppression of freedom of speech, and it was a controversial exhibit, of course. But this person, the Korean artist, was invited to come and put a lifelike replica of a real version of that statue as an exhibit in this art exhibition, as an example of testing the limits of freedom of speech in Japan. And sure enough, what happened was there was a wave of criticism, of course, by Japanese who, for a start, reject the history of comfort women to begin with, which of course always makes Japan look terrible, when they're doing that to start with, including the mayor of Nagoya, who says that, the Koreans are lying about the comfort women thing, which is, not good for Japan's diplomatic image to be saying that. And a lot of people saying that, this is, so you have these critics, for the most part, sort of far right-wing revisionists who sort of are against the idea of the statue because they say it represents a fabrication of history and a lie. which is kind of playing into the Korean hands, because you can't get away with saying that, of course. But even worse than that, what happened was apparently some people sent threatening faxes. Only in Japan do terrorists send actual faxes. And the fax messages said that they would do what happened at Kyoto Animation, that they would go into the exhibit with a bunch of gasoline if they didn't take it out. And so the mayor said, who was already against the exhibit, said, well, now it's a public safety thing. In order to protect everybody because of these violent threats by righteously outraged Japanese people, we are cancelling this exhibit. So two problems there, obviously. One, the fact that they allowed this exhibit and then they're shutting it down makes Japan now look really terrible, of course. I think they've given away the moral high ground on that. And the second thing, of course, is they're basically succumbing to terror. And, it's basically the government agreeing in the end to agreeing with terror threats. And it lends enormous weight and credibility to, the types of people who would make these kind of threats are such a small minority in Japan, and yet it makes it look like they're running the country. It makes it look like they have sway. So, as usual, the South Koreans have been able to find, to me this is an own goal by the Japanese side, actually agreeing to take this exhibit down. It would have actually demonstrated much more tolerance. I would have to just leave it there and grit through it, even if you disagree with it, which obviously some Japanese people do. But to actually give in, and the way that this has been taken down looks terrible. So I would say Japan's really screwed that up, and that's where they've really actually South Korea's got them beat, at least on that issue. So what can you do? But there's no resolution to this. I was joking earlier in the week that of course. It seemed like it was almost like punishment by Trump. I'm coming to this. John Bolton, he wanted an invasion of Iran, which Trump, stopped at the last minute. He's obviously, not exactly a war sort of person. Obviously, he's decided to put Bolton on the outer, and it was clearly just a kind of hazing kind of punishment that they sent John Bolton as a mediator between South Korea and Japan, which I was joking. Here's a guy who's just obsessed with declaring war and bombing North Korea and Iran. The biggest warmonger in the US administration, they were sending him as a peace negotiator between South Korea and Japan, and I was joking they should have sent Michael Bolton instead. And of course all that he did was he came here and sang bomb, 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 bomb Iran. And, everyone ignored him and he went away, and now South Korea and Japan are going at it. No one's ever going to fix this issue. These issues are too deep and they're not fixable. It'll pass over at some point. But what can you do? It's just the same old stuff again and again. But yes, this was funny. I don't actually often find the Rising Wasabi funny, but I found this one, probably because it cuts a little bit close to home, but I saw this week. Selfish son goes back to live in Japan again. We have no idea what he does over there, says Mrs. Cunnington. Why can't he just stay at home? He comes home every now and then. He seems a little bit more detached every time that he comes back here. And the response from the guy saying, I go home, I'm an outsider. I go to Japan, and I'm an outsider. At least Japan has better culture. So many people commented, ouch, on that. I thought this is hilarious. I mean, the reality of it is indeed. I remember my mother once complaining that I was further away than my sister. I was further away from Australia than my sister, who was in Scotland at the time. I mean, you could almost go to the exact opposite side of the planet. And I realized psychologically Japan is like Mars for a lot of people and a lot of families, my own included. It's kind of weird how Japan suddenly become popular, and now everyone's suddenly planning trips to come here, which is great. I mean, I've been telling people all along it's great and you should come here, but it's always been a little bit too mysterious and a little bit hard to get to, and no one ever came, and all of a sudden now everyone's coming and it's wonderful. And I hope it will break down this, but this is still very real, and this was kind of funny. The final story that I have actually blocked out for tonight is this, which seems ridiculous at first, but if you've started to experience the hell that is the Japanese summer, I mean, the fact that they're doing the Olympics at this time of year, next year, and what an enormous mistake that is, and how ridiculous that is amazing. But there's two things that make, well, for a start, this just reminds me again how the Four Seasons thing about Japan is a complete joke. There is definitely a winter, there is definitely an autumn, that's definitely a fall. Those are two very distinct seasons, and they're wonderful in Japan. Spring, there's not really a spring, there's kind of a spring, but spring is basically a period of unstable weather accompanied with hay fever, which then right before the end of spring turns into the, well, first chocolate season, of course, and then, just after the chocolate starts coming out, you get rainy season for like a month, where it just rains for a month and it's miserable. And these are different seasons. You have the hay fever season, you have kind of wind season, then you have rainy season, and then you come out of it. We've just come out of it this week into stinking sauna, can't escape, no shade, suffocating, humid and hot summer, and that is what we are now in. And I must admit, you can't walk for 2 or 3 minutes outside without getting coated in sweat. And the thing is, it's a similar kind of heat to what you get in Singapore or the tropics. I've been to Singapore on the equator, and it's been less hot than in Tokyo at this time of year. But the point is, when you live in the tropics, your body adapts. You don't sweat all the time. Your body gets used to processing the heat and whatnot. But the problem with Japan is that it's freezing cold in winter, so you never adapt to it. You're always pouring sweat in summer and freezing cold in winter. So this idea from Sony that you can get this little sort of smartphone type thing which you can put in a shirt which can cool you. I desperately need this for 2 reasons. Not just for going around outside, but also for the fact that inside the office, most offices in Japan set the thermostat, because the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry requested 15 years ago as part of Cool Biz that most companies would try to save energy to fight climate change by setting the thermostat, instead of to 26 degrees or 25 degrees, I'd set it to 28 degrees, which in my office, I keep a thermostat by my desk. It means that often the cooler doesn't come on until it's already nearly 29 degrees, and then it will kick in and it'll go down to 27. But you go through this roller coaster day between 27 and 29 degrees, and really when it gets 28 degrees or above, you're sweaty, you smell, and it's hard to concentrate. So for that as well, I would love this. So I think this is a great idea, actually. I'm all for that. And yes. So a few more topics. I thought that was the last one. A couple more topics. This guy, this crazy, sweaty, slightly stressed out looking person who was kicked out of the Ishin no Kai, which is a right-wing Osaka-based political party. He has been an independent. He's refused to resign after he went on a government-sponsored ministerial trip to the occupied Japanese islands occupied by Russia. And he went there and he drunkenly suggested loudly to everybody that we should have another war with Russia and fight to get the islands back, which people said was just batshit crazy, and he was forced to leave this party, but he didn't resign his seat. He has joined the Save the Japanese People from NHK party, which is basically lobbying in Parliament to make it so that only people who actually watch NHK have to pay the NHK broadcast fee. So it's basically a party which is just dedicated. There's this one-issue party which is to either abolish or to restrict the scope of the broadcast fee for NHK, which is hilarious. So yes, how much was that? CSMR Japan, I don't know what you're talking about. How much was what? I can't interpret that question, I'm afraid. So yes, I will go back. But in any case, yes, he got raging drunk and he declared war on Russia while he was in Russia, which embarrassed everybody. So now he's declared war on NHK. He's going to help the other person who, in a shock, how much does it cost? The shirt I see, it's going to come out next year. So it's still just a prototype and it's not clear how much it's going to cost. But if it's anything below $200, I will buy it. Look at that. It will retail for 14,080 yen. So there we go. It's in my budget. I will buy that. I will buy that when that comes out next year, though. However, not this year. So yes, coming back. The war with Russia is indeed not over yet. There is no peace treaty with Russia because Russia still occupies Japanese islands. And don't forget, you think that it ended in 5 days at the end of World War II when Russia grabbed the islands and the war ended. But no, the people who lived on those islands, and as well as people who were in Manchuria fighting against Russia, where there was actual land tank battles, they were sent to prison camps in Siberia and held until the 1960s. Tens of thousands of Japanese were held there. Many of them died there. And they didn't get to come back for 20 years, even though the war with Russia, really a hot war, only took 5 days. So yeah, there's a lot of unresolved stuff with Russia, although, Putin loves Akita dogs and judo, so the hope is that that will improve. But yes, so in any case, coming back to the NHK party, there is this party dedicated to to restricting the broadcast fee, which NHK is also fighting against. It was hilarious watching the party political broadcast on NHK, which they by law have to allow to happen, including someone on NHK railing against NHK. This person has decided to use his energy for fighting war with Russia to fighting war with NHK. And it should be interesting to see if that hurts or helps the campaign of the party. Some of you might remember the Cool Japan Fund and the idea that the Japanese government was going to fund things that it thought were cool. And as you'd almost expect, like a drunk dancing uncle, they funded everything. They did everything that wasn't cool. They basically got celebrities that don't speak English. They sort of, just did it all wrong, just like you'd expect. And after about 15 years of trying very hard to be cool, the Japanese government has decided that it is not cool, and it seems to do actually much better when it just doesn't get involved. And they've decided to stop the Cool Japan Fund, or at least to stop trying to designate what's cool and what is not cool, and that's probably a good idea. And that's pretty much it. That's it in terms of topics. Should we do some music? What do you reckon? We've got a couple of minutes. I thought we'd have more time left. We've got 5 minutes left, but hell, I'm up for it. So let's do that, shall we? Unless you got any topics or questions, or if not, I won't talk about butter, Sergeant Booker. Please allow me to remain calm, please. There seems to be some competition between butter and music. Okay, butter update. Well, there isn't really a butter update. I mean, it's the same ridiculous as usual. What happens with these extremely hot summers that we're getting? Reggae, I like it. I might do reggae. That sounds pretty good. With these summers, what happened last year when it was too hot was that the cows, there wasn't enough feed for the cows, and they didn't produce enough milk, and this is where you have these shortages every year of dairy in Japan because of the heat, and clearly we're having another record summer. Again, Japan's capacity to supply its own people with sufficient amounts of butter, cheese, and milk and other dairy products, but particularly butter, will no doubt not be met once again, in spite of the fact that Japan is in a free trade treaty with countries that have ample supplies of butter to sell to Japan. They don't want them, which is just ridiculous. But there's no particular news on that other than, of course, that it's happening again. Thank you, Quint Rankin. Remember, if you do like this show, it does give me some moral. It gives me some moral encouragement if you remember to like, so please do that. Mr. Kordychev, I'm going to Thailand next week. Next week I'm going to be away. I'm going to be in Phuket, Thailand. My dad's moving back to New Zealand at the end of this year, so it'll be the last trip there. But I probably won't do a show next week. It'll be the week after that. But I will be having all the butter I'll just be eating it straight out of the jar. So, that's what I'm doing with that. Hardcore metal reggae, well, that sounds like ska, and I'm all about ska, so I'm not quite sure how I'd cue that up in Chaos Oscillator, but I like the challenge of that, so let's do that. Let me cue up the Chaos Oscillator, switch over to here, and let's take a crack at this. Oh, now that should not be showing that should be showing Chaos Oscillator. No. So it's still showing the image from earlier. Oh, well, I'll just do it straight off. So ska music. Tai Nakamura, are you still there? I will have a good time in Thailand. So reggae music, generally 70, 80 BPM. So for ska music, you want to double time it. So I will make it 160 BPM. You also probably don't want a too heavy beat, so let's try to find a beat that I can use. Disco, not really disco, probably actually techno is a better kind of light version of it. Oh, there is the sound, let's get that going. Oh, come on. Technical issues are happening. Come on. Okay, let's just try it without that. Oh, I know what's wrong. There we go. Okay. Now let's plug this in. Okay, let's have a go at this. So, ska music. Oh. Okay. Okay, that's clearly not what I want. Okay. Let's just take that to start with. I'll try to improve the beat later on. You want a guitar-y chord. That's not really it. Let's make it. That's terrible. In fact, let's not do that. Let's do this. Let's definitely quantize that. That's not really. That's not really working. Okay, let's try a different beat. That on the wrong part of the loop. Some bass on this. That sounds terrible. That doesn't really sound very good, and it's probably gonna take me a time to get back into it. So, okay, let me play around with this a little bit more. But the drums are off. The top sounds terrible, and I don't have a bass line yet. This is not working out. Okay, I'm gonna try one more shot at this, and then I'm gonna call it quits. So let's see if I can find some better way to pull this out. It's kind of 80s, that's better. Actually, that's better. Okay. Well, that's pretty good. Do the chords again. That's not bad. To quit, I used to play the piano when I was a kid, but you know, not really. That's the start of a track. Not bad. Anyway, I'm going to save that and call it a night. Yeah, I'll say. Okay, well, thank you for joining, everybody. It's been good having you. Remember, I'll be out next week, but week after next I'll be back. So you can still keep following me on Twitter and Facebook at Hikosimon for everything. Remember, check out ASMR Sounds of Japan. Give me a Breakman's show. You can see our show from last night. And hopefully, now that it's a little bit easy, maybe we'll figure out a way to get that going again as well. And thank you always. Remember to like if you liked. I will eat lots of butter while I'm in Thailand. And keep cool till after school. Ka kite ano. Peace. Boom. Have a good one, everyone. End stream.